Hey out there, reading friends. Just doing a quick update on where I am with my readathons. This month keeps getting interrupted by other things besides just the readathon books that I'm doing. Um, I've discovered a couple of different new, to me anyway, book review sites that I've been getting books from. Excuse me. And to honor those deadlines, I've had to insert some of those in, even if they don't really fit the readathon prompts that I'm doing. But it is really fun to get to read these books for free. This first one that I'm going to share with you is one of those books. It didn't qualify for any of the readathons I was doing. But I absolutely fell in love with this story. There's a lot of questions that are raised. I'm usually not one that's easy to fool. I can usually figure things out pretty quickly. And this one kept me guessing right up until the end and leaves you with a great big cliffhanger. It's the first book in a series. So I'm intrigued to see what the rest of it. This I got from, I think this one might have come from Bookish first. It's called Girl Desecrated by Cheryl Cowton. It's the first in a series. Basically, it's a young lady who finds herself dealing with a mother who's in an asylum, who has spent her entire life telling her daughter she's demon possessed, a la sort of. There's a reference in the book made to the movie Carrie, if you know that storyline at all. Only she finds out that it's not exactly what her mother thinks, and the doctors have diagnosed her as being a split personality or multiple personality disorder, and it's not that either. She meets this gentleman who is Scottish and finds out through a series of really unfortunate events that she is the latest in a long line of women who are living under an old Highland curse. And there is this creature called the Fergus She, who somehow found a way to be reborn in the females in her lineage over and over and over again. And the Scotsman that she meets is the latest in the lineage of those who are supposed to deal with her, somehow set her free, whatever. And so we're left at the end of the book where the Fergus She has been released. And that's just kind of where the book leaves you. So it leaves you hanging big time. So I'm really looking forward to the sequel. Didn't fit any of my prompts, but it still was just a really good book to read. So I love being able to read that, get to write the review. This next one was in one of my readathons called Tink's Neverland by S.E. Smith. Jasmine Bell is nicknamed Tinker by her friends because she's very mechanically inclined. She can fix any car you bring to her. She's a problem solver. She's an engineer. If it's got a motor and it runs and has machinery parts, she can fix it and repair it and put it together for you. She lives in an apartment building with a friend of hers who comes from a family that's loaded, so he just spends his time in really outrageous scientific experimentation. And she finds herself sort of sucked into an alternate dimension through one of his experiments. In this dimension, the people she meets, the race she meets on a spaceship, are in danger of dying out because they're are more men born than women, and when they mate for life. And there's this funky circle tattoo that shows up. It's unique to each couple. They both have it. I believe it's on the palm of their hand or the inside of their wrist or something. And when she's stumbling around on the deck of the ship and freaking out in a good way over being able to see space from the command deck of the ship, she grabs the hands of the captain, and they both end up being burned with this tattoo, which means she's his mate. She's the one intended for him. And they're very surprised to find out that women from Earth actually can be mated to the men of their race. And it's the beginning of a series. She has sisters that they hint very, very clearly in the book are, and I went and looked at the titles for the rest of the series. Her sisters end up in the same alternate reality. It's a very fun book. It's a cute little steamy romance. It was fun and light to read. Again, got to write a review for it, but it was fun. That one fit into my Lotteryathon as a random number. That was one of the prompts for the Lotteryathon. You just generate a random number and then count through. I don't keep a lot of hard copy books around just because I don't want to have to dust them, but I have a ton on my Kindle, so I just random number generated and counted and got to that title as one of them. It was cute. It was a fun book. I don't think I got it from a review site. I think I got it for free from something, so it was fun to read. The group book for Lotteryathon, I got through that one only because, and it's way out of order, I probably should have read it last, but I had to request it, have them put it on hold for me at the library because it was out. And with our library, if you request something on hold, you can't renew it. It's got to go back right away. So I can't renew this when it comes due. I've got to get it turned in. So I read it right away. It's called The 10,000 Doors of January by Alex E. Harrow. It's the group book for the Lotteryathon. It is so good. It is so, so good. I fell in love with this book. Um, January is a girl, and she stumbles onto a doorway that opens between her world and alternate worlds. Apparently, alternate realities was my thing this week. Um, and she believes they exist all over the world. She lives under the care of a gentleman by the name of Mr. Locke. Her father works for him. Her mother's dead. She doesn't remember her mother. Her mother died when she was very, very young, or so she thinks. Um, in the course of the story, her father's traveling the majority of the time, bringing back these rare artifacts from Mr. Locke. She talks about being an in-between girl. When she describes herself, she talks about her skin being in between. She's not black, she's not white. They don't really ever give her a specific ethnic affiliation. She's just darker skinned than a Caucasian, living in an era when they had no rights and they had no freedom. So as long as she's under Mr. Locke's care, she's fine. He can get privileges for her that she would not be able to get for herself. Um, but she doesn't see her father very often. And in this blue treasure box in the attic, she keeps finding things that she thinks Mr. Locke has left there for her. She finds out later it's one of a pair. And when you put something in the other trunk, it's magically transported to the trunk in the house where she lives. So she finds out someone else has been sending her things all along. And she finds a book that at first comes across as a scholarly treatise on the study of these doors. She says door with a capital D, these passageways between worlds. Um, and the fact that the one that she found ends up being destroyed. Um, and she begins to see, as she's reading the scholarly treatise, that this is happening over and over again. And so she has to, as she grows up, her father ends up sending back a caregiver for her and a woman to sort of be a companion and a chaperone and an arrow when that kind of thing was needed. Um, People are not who they seem to be. Her past is not what she's always been told. Her father's past is not what she's always been told. There's all sorts of little surprises. And just when you go, oh, okay, good, that's a really cute surprise, there's another little one thrown in just for fun. It's Alex Harrow's debut novel, and it's a beautiful story. It's really well written. The characters are beautifully crafted. The challenge for Harrow in this book was because she has all of these incidences where characters are going in through these passageways between worlds. She not only had to deal with a believably crafted world based in our reality, she had to create worlds that even if I only got a glimpse of, I had to be able to kind of in my head go, oh, okay. So she had to create a variety of worlds, just fantasy enough to be different than ours, but just believable enough that you could see people drifting back and forth between these worlds. So an excellent book, highly recommended, 5-star rating for me. I did review this one. I don't necessarily review everything I read, but this one I did review, and it's definitely a 5-star rating. It's definitely worth the read. Just really well crafted characters, a really beautifully crafted story, and you have a little girl who um, starts out with very little self confidence, and you watch her grow up into a teenager, maybe even a young 20 something by the end of the story. Just a beautiful story of a young girl kind of coming into her own and kind of learning that it's okay to change your perspective of people and to change your opinion of them when they prove that is a necessary move. But yeah, I highly recommend, 5-star rating from me. Very definitely, it was a great book. So to the organizers of the Lotteryathon, excellent choice. This last one, I'm really stretching one of the prompts. I don't do subscription boxes. I just don't. I've never found one that I've loved enough to spend the money on. I follow on Instagram several subscription services, and I've watched people do unboxings. I've just never seen one and I've gone, oh my gosh, I must have this. So I'm stretching it a bit, because the one thing that I do with as much regularity as people who do subscription boxes is there's these 2 or 3 websites I go to get reviews. Now, I specifically chose a book that I got from Bookish First. If you don't know about Bookish First, every week on Monday they put up 2 or 3 titles. You go in and you read an excerpt. You give your first impression, kind of a little mini review of what you think so far. And then you may be chosen to be an ARC reader for that book. I think I've gotten 3 or 4 from them. This one is one of those, and so I kind of stretched it since I have subscription boxes. but I do this other, you kind of have to bid for it to get it, and you don't always get what you bid on. I did do it that way. It's called Supernova Era, and I'm not even going to attempt to pronounce the author's name. The author is Chinese. The book was originally written in Chinese and translated by Joel Martinson, who was on here. Wild premise, a really wild premise. It was a 4-star for me, not a 5, and I'll explain why. It came very close to being a 5-star. 8 light years from Earth, a star that is larger than our sun that we don't know exists, goes supernova. And in doing so, the sky gets weirdly colored. Um, these red ribbons of light go drifting through the sky, and everybody's kind of wowed by this. There's this nebula in the sky that they call the Rose Nebula that actually becomes sort of like another moon or a set of stars lit up by the supernova. It has impact on the climate on the planet, temporary impact. You find out at the end of the book that the impact, it takes a few years and the impact starts reversing itself. But the coastlines of most continents do find themselves underwater because it heats the planet to the point that the continent of Antarctica becomes livable. But the premise is that along with all of these red lights and things, the cover art is just really cool too. You can see there are these little things like just dashing through the air. The premise is that the level of radiation the humans experience all over the planet is so unique that it affects humans at the chromosomal level. And for whatever reason, for example, the Mir space station, they have a conversation at the beginning of the book that takes place between ground control and the Mir space station. And they're trying to figure out how to get them out of there because their sensors aren't working. The space station has been critically damaged by this supernova. And the doctor on the space station gets on and says, we've all been exposed to 5,100 rad of radiation. We're literally hours from dying. Leave us here and let us send back what information we can. Don't try to rescue us. They discover pretty quickly some guy is doing a random blood sampling test, and when they run the samples, the guy who runs the blood samples comes back to him and wants to know what hospital all these patients are from. And when he sees the results, they start drawing blood samples of everybody in the hospital. They discover everybody has been affected on the planet by this radiation. 13 and younger, at the age of 13 and younger, the bodies are able to correct the problem. Children 13 and younger are able to self-heal. The majority of them, a handful do die, but they're able to self-heal. Everybody over the age of 13 has, at most, 10 months to live by the time they figure out what's going on. So about a year from the time the supernova happens, everybody over the age of 13 on the planet will be dead. So at first I was like, great, another post-apocalyptic book where teenagers are going to save the world. Not exactly. The adults in every country, this book focuses on a group of kids out of China because the author's Chinese, it makes sense. They do get into other countries eventually, but the majority of the story is about 3 kids that all went to school together. And their teacher is a part of the story at the beginning until the storyline dictates that she die because all the adults, literally everybody over the age of 13 dies. There is no miraculous cure found, nobody. But countries all over the world hold these civilization games where they take kids who are 13 years old and they take them to some large open space where there's not a lot of buildings, and they break the ground up into countries, and they give them too many of some resources and not enough of another, or just enough of some, just to kind of see how kids handle creating their own little countries. And from those games, countries choose their child presidents and premiers and leaders, people who 13-year-olds who are going to be trusted to run the country. So when these adults train these kids, they train them to run the country like its current population is still going to be there and like they're all adults. But then they also tell the kids to make sure they're still getting their schooling. So the population of the planet plummets, obviously, as the end gets near and everyone's getting sick. The adults all just sort of agree to leave. They just all get onto transports and they go to holding places, essentially, where there's a timer set to turn off. They have this thing called the epic clock that's hanging on every wall. It's playing on every piece of social media, on every TV screen that you can find. And it's just covered in green. And as different little departure points, they call them, as the last person there dies. Some of them have people wearing body sensors. Others just have the timer set to be, it's going to be right about here. So eventually the screen just goes black in a matter of a couple of days. And that's the indicator that all the adults on the planet have died. There's no more adults left. So these 13-year-old kids have to try to run the country. Well, they're asking their peers and everyone younger than them to run the daycares and run schools and run electrical plants and water treatment plants and be the firefighters and fly planes and drive cars and drive bulldozers. Literally, these adults trained them to run the world like adults. And it doesn't take long for the kids to be like, this sucks. We're working all day. We're going to school all night. You've got 13-year-olds that are working like 18-hour days, and that's not going to fly for very long. Kids want to play. That's their driving motivation when they're younger, as it should be. And so then they try to figure out how to play. The American president, a young man, Herman Davey, I believe is his name, he suggests having everybody's military. They decided to do a military Olympics. Real weapons, tanks, guns, bayonets, everything. And they go down to the Antarctic continent. And basically it's head-to-head competition like in Olympics. The crazy thing is, unlike normal war where there would just be surprise attacks, there's an agreement on we will start at this time. These are the rules. When this has happened, one of the teams has won. It's very bizarre, but it's very childlike. It's very, there have to be rules. There's a right and a wrong way to play the game, even though they're literally killing one another. It's the most bizarre thing in the world. So the big question the book raises is, would it have been better for the adults to try to find a way to let kids be kids, but keep farming, things like that? Did trying to keep all of the adult industries going shot them in the foot, essentially, because it was too much work for children to be able to mentally and emotionally bear up under. And their desire to play got really outrageous. They started playing with actual weapons. But they had been trained how to use them. They had been trained how to fly fighter jets. They had been trained how to shoot intercontinental ballistic missiles. They had been trained how to shoot guns. They knew how to run machine guns. Because the adults went, we have to train them to run our world, even though the adults were all gone. And the world was literally being run by children. The only thing that kept it from being a 5-star for me was the author has a tendency to wax very philosophical. And the philosophical moments always relate to the story. They just slow the pace down a little bit for me. It's very deliberately paced, at which, when you're reading a section of a story where children are literally firing weapons on one another as a really bizarre Olympics, the slow, calm, steady, measured pace has this really weird effect on you, but it's really cool. Like you're reading this going, it's being presented in a very matter-of-fact way, but emotionally you're all like churned up. So it's a really interesting approach that worked for me. At the end of the book, and this is a complete spoiler, but I just want to get this out there. At the end of the book, 2 of the countries literally decide to trade territory, with the understanding that all artifacts get left behind. You're allowed to take personal items for survival, but 2 countries' populations, these kids literally agree to just swap. Now, the country that I'm not going to tell you who the countries are. That much I will leave out of the spoiler. The country that proposes the swap is very adamant when they say every artifact, every historical artifact, every whatever has to stay in country. You can't take any of it with you. They make the other country toe that line pretty carefully, and there are hints all through the last part of the book that they had their reasons, but you never find out what those reasons are. So I can't decide, because that's really the only piece of the story that doesn't get tied up fairly neatly in the end. I can't decide if that's the author's way of just kind of leaving you on edge going, children are manipulative, or if he intends to write a sequel and what the plan of this one country was, this one country's citizens was, will come to light in the sequel. I don't know. I just know he doesn't give anything away to explain what this secret motive was, what their secret plan was. I liked it a lot. Other than the philosophical moments that kind of removed it from a 5-star for me, it was a little too deliberate and slow and well paced all the way throughout the whole book for me. And a part of that was because these little philosophical chunks, these little philosophical sort of musings would show up, and I kind of slowed the story down. But I really liked it. I would read more by this author. It was an interesting premise, only because, like I said, so many of the post-apocalyptic books we see coming from authors today, the adults are all either idiots or stupid or evil. They're all stupid or evil. They can't run the world, or they're all out to destroy everybody. And so teenagers have to come in and save the day, and teenagers are always way smarter than the adults, which some are, I'm sure, but teenagers are also making decisions that are based on absolutely zero life experience and things they shouldn't be, decisions they shouldn't be able to make because they don't have the right life experience to make them, if that makes sense. Um, or their really immature decisions magically work in the world that they're in. Um, and so I liked this because the children were convinced they could create a better world than the adults, and they really didn't. Um, they were so convinced that the adults, they were too focused on work, they didn't understand the power of play, and children literally turned war into a game with rules. Um, so I appreciated the fact that the author basically, I think, came from the approach that everybody screws up. Um, when your goals are selfish, you will screw up because the children, all they wanted to do was play. They didn't care about the longevity of the planet, the longevity of their peers, the longevity of their nation. They want to play. They want to have fun. So other important matters fall to the wayside, and they end up making fatal, violent choices. It's a really interesting read. It's worth picking up. The title, by the way, comes from they begin reordering time or re-identifying time with the beginning of this. They call the Common Era the era that we're living in now, and then they call it Supernova Era. So any like historical documentation, there are times in the book where the author goes, in later years, when interviewed, people who lived through that era would say, and the date is always SE7 or SE35 or SE42. So they start renumbering the years based on when the supernova happened and the world was reinvented. So coming up this week, I will be reading Patron Saints of Nothing, which is my Latinx author. It's also one I'm reviewing for Bookish First. And House, which is a book with green on the cover. So that's the plan for the rest of this week. A little more time to read. Marching band season has one more football game, but competitions are done, so I have more time to read. So talk to you later.